Peter Parker wakes up with his head throbbing. "Something doesn't feel right," he groans. Looking at the headline on the paper, he sees "Spider-Man turns bad" and realizes he's been framed for a $1 million heist. In comparison to the first Amazing Spider-Man game, which wasn't really that amazing, there's an air of exploration this time around rather than your standard platformer stages. For example, you have to drop into a pit to find a crowbar, which you need in order to break into some boarded up buildings. You'll find access cards and other things which will grant you access to parts you've passed but couldn't get to. It's not a Metroidvania by any means, not even close, but it adds a subtle layer of depth that the first game didn't have. Climbing upstairs is easy enough, but dropping back down them is really finicky for some reason. It sort of works if you jump at an angle in such a way that you'd be hurtling yourself down them, but it's not intuitive at all. Finicky is the running theme with the controls, but then from an LJN game, what do you expect? To reach most platforms, you'll need to double jump, which you can do with 2 rapid presses of the B button. Bear in mind though, if you leave too much space between the 2 presses, it won't work. Instead, you'll sometimes do a flying kick. A shoots your web, but only if you're jumping and at the right angle, otherwise it throws a punch. In fact, shooting the web line is just as useless as it was before. It rarely activates when you intend it to. It activates when you don't intend it to. It has barely any range, less range than your double jump has, which makes me question its usage. I've yet to come to a section where you need to use it. You can wrap enemies up in it to slow them, but for what purpose? Also, it runs out really quickly and refills are very rare. More useful, and more usable, is the wall climbing mechanic. If you double jump near and towards a vertical surface, Spidey will quite often cling onto it, allowing you to scale buildings quite easily, and it actually seems to work reasonably consistently. This is by far the best way to get to the upper regions of the levels, which you need to do to get to many of the doors. Navigation is not simply a left to right or bottom to top affair. You do have to go back and forth, up and down to figure out where the objectives are. Bear in mind that enemies are constantly spawning to try to get you, so don't idle for a moment. They'll shoot out of windows or run headlong at you. On the first level, Jack-o'-lantern is flying about up top, constantly chucking pumpkins at you. This is super irritating when you're trying to climb, as it's hard to avoid. There are plenty of dangers down below as well. If you see a chain link fence with danger emblazoned on it, that's an electric fence and will immediately kill you should you touch it. I did this more than once trying to jump over said fence. Just turn around. There are 5 levels ranging from the city through laboratories, factories and sewers. To get to level 2, you need to get over that electric fence I mentioned, but of course your web is useless for this, and I don't know why you would think otherwise. You need to catch the hobgoblin using your webbing, again super finicky but try your best, who will then drop down to the ground. You need to beat him up to get a key. You can then collect some oil from a locked building, which will allow you to fly his goblin glider to the next stage. The variation in level goals thereafter is appreciated, but not executed all that well. A large part of Stage 2 is getting these targeting reticles to shoot out these control panels. I know what I'm supposed to do here, but for me it's virtually impossible. They're snipers aiming for you, so you need to stand in front of the switches, then duck out of the way at the very last second, so the gunmen destroy the switches instead. There are 4 of them, and if you don't get through all of them in good time, they'll repair themselves. Good luck, that's all I'll say. I can appreciate the ambition with The Amazing Spider-Man 2. As is commonplace with LJN-affiliated games on the Game Boy, the presentation is very nice, but you'll get frustrated to no end with the awkward control scheme. It's to be expected at this point when you see that rainbow on the cover art. The non-linear level progression is quite refreshing for the time. You can, and have to, backtrack to any part of the game at any point. For example, once you complete the 3rd stage, you get an entry code that allows you access to another part of the 2nd stage, things of that nature, which gives a certain feel of adventure to this game. The controls are a bit better than the first game, but not by a lot. The most famous feature of Spider-Man is, of course, his web-slinging ability, and this still isn't implemented correctly here. It feels like a complete afterthought, coming into play as it does so infrequently, as well as being so bloody hard to use. You spend most of your time on your feet. Compare that to the comic or the cartoon or whatever, and you'll surely feel like something is missing here.